Oh,
wrong.
hi. I didn't see you come in. Please. No, it's not awkward. No, come here. I was just about to start something. My name is Graham Gentz. I use he, they pronouns. This is life action role play, and I'm here with a bunch of game designers. I'm a game designer too, which is why I'm going to ask everybody to go around, introduce themselves, just a brief introduction, and tell me what was the first game you remember? Let's go with Gabrielle first.
Hey y'all, I'm Gabrielle Rabinowitz. I'm a game designer in Brooklyn, New York. I write a lot of Jewish games and also non-Jewish games and all kinds of games. My most recently kickstarted a game called Manish Tana about the Passover Seder. But I'm really excited to be here. And the first game that I remember is probably like just playing, and pretend with my sister. Like I think, we collected lots of stuff. Even things that weren't intended. Like I remember we collected Hot Wheels cars and we would like act them out. We didn't like put them on racetracks. We gave them personalities and like role played with the Hot Wheels cars. So that's definitely my earliest game memory.
How about Dustin?
Hello, everybody. I'm Dustin Winter, he, him, and the earliest game that I can remember is, do you all remember Perfection?
Perfection.
No?
The like
So
the
you're
thing
trying to
that
fit the
shapes
shapes
and
into the thing,
like-
and
It
then
is,
it's gonna
yes.
like explode.
There are,
Yeah.
yes, exactly that. Exactly that. So that was the earliest game that I can remember playing, and probably explains why I have incredible amounts of anxiety in my adult life. Because if you've never played Perfection, it really is. You have a lot of very small yellow shaped pieces, stars and moons and all kinds of things, and you have to find all of the places in the game board to place them. But the game board is on a ticking timer, and the game board is depressed, and then when the timer goes and you don't know how much time you have, it pops up and all of the pieces spray up in your face. For some reason, I really loved this game as a child.
It's very aggressive, because it's an explosion.
It is, and it drives everyone around you who is not playing the game just totally bananas.
And oddly, it's not trying to teach the lesson of like it's okay not to get everything perfect when the thing pops out. Like it's literally the opposite. It's like, nope, you totally screwed up. It's the worst possible thing.
And it's very punishing.
Don't
because
try.
It's throwing itself into your face. Man, game design, am I right? Alexi, tell us about yourself.
Hey, so I'm Alexi Sargent. I am a designer based out of the DC area. You can follow all of my gaming endeavors online at Cloven Pine Games. So check out the handle Cloven Pine Games on itch.io and on Twitter, or check out my Substack, Murmurs from the Cloven Pine. I'm really intrigued by this first game question, because I feel like we've all been interpreting it a little bit differently. Like, what is a game? What does it mean to be your first game? So I think, like Gabrielle, I have a lot of memories of playing, kind of free-form improv games with my siblings, where sometimes we're hitting each other with sticks, sometimes we're coming up with a story that surrounds the hitting each other with sticks. But those are in retrospect kind of nascent LARPs, right? But I want to credit the first traditional tabletop RPG I played, and that is Dread by Epidaya Ravachol, the horror game where you have a Jenga tower, and when the tower falls, your character is doomed. And that is just such a great game where the simple pitch with its basic mechanics is enough to get me to want to organize a gaming session around Halloween, and that's what I did, and that's what kind of pulled me into the whole world of tabletop gaming.
Dread's a great call out. I adore Dread. It was one of the first games to challenge me as a designer to think about mechanics truly outside the box. And it further employs the idea of mechanics as like being fundamental to what you're doing. It's not just you choose numbers and you choose dice, but it's a metaphor. It's like practically screaming at you that it's the tension being built. I adore Dread. I play it as much as I can. Pat, tell us a little about yourself.
I guess that's me. I'm Patrick Watson. I write as the Oat half of Oat and Noodle Studios. we make tabletop games and both board and role playing variety. The first game that I can remember playing, besides a LARP that I like to think of as Troll My Parents, is I would play whenever we go over to my grandparents. We would always play like poker and dominoes and a large number of gambling games. And I'm now like reevaluating why I was able to win money at those. Like as an adult, I never really directed my attention toward it, but I've been playing them since I was very, very tiny. And yeah, that's the first one I remember.
Wow, what a rocketing flashback we just got. We got perfection. We have early examples of gambling. I also played poker with my family, but we used like popcorn kernels. Did you use like pennies
Money.
and
Yeah.
$20 bills.
so like money?
Pennies are like a quarter is like the most outrageous bet any of us would ever make. Like
Okay.
that's proof positive that you're bluffing.
I think that I remember sort of pretend either on the playground being really important to me since I was either reading or if I was with people. And I also had like a car collection. I'm a younger brother, so I inherited animal toys and cars, and very quickly the cars became a faction, and they were alive and had personalities, and they would interact with the animals, the like tiger and giraffes, and early themes of technology versus nature and everything else. So the idea that when role playing appeared in my life, it was the idea that I could have specific agency, because you read books, you read you watch movies, but the idea that you're marrying these stuff is part of it. So that was my introduction to role playing, and Alexi already kind of jumped on it for him. So I'd like to ask everybody else. So what was your introduction into tabletop role playing or RP in general? Like, what was the on ramp? What was the experience? What was it like for you?
I'll jump in again. I knew about D&D a lot, but never really was drawn to it. But I was intrigued by the concept of role-playing games. But it wasn't until I discovered that there were non-D&D role-playing games that I got very excited. And that's no shade, it's just not for me. But there's a comic book store near me in Brooklyn, Anyone Comics, and they were running indie game like one-shots that anyone could go to. And I went to, and I saw that they were running Harlem Unbound. And I was just like, Harlem Renaissance, the role-playing game, but with Lovecraftian horror, like this is amazing. And that was my first game, and I sort of never looked back after that. I was like hooked, and couldn't get enough of the amazing different perspectives that people were bringing into games. So yeah, that's where I started, and here I am today.
Speaking of Dread and Everyone Comics, shout out to my friend Leo, who was there on Saturday running Dread at Everyone Comics.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
That's awesome. I was
Love you,
there
Leo.
on Sunday.
Oh, cool. Very, very awesome. I could call on people, but Dustin, tell me about role playing, man.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up the youngest of three. I had two older brothers. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, I'm a game designer from the Baltimore area. And so they're like 8 and 11 years older than I am. So they had a lot of D&D books growing up. They were just sort of laying around the house. I've got some really cool old like first and second edition books that might actually be worth like some coin if they didn't actually have like 5-year-old me's like crayon scribbles inside of them. So I got a hold of those pretty early, and then I think the first game I ever tried to run/create was, I thought, I really like the X-Men, and so I really want to make an X-Men RPG, and so I tried to mash up the X-Men in D&D. It did not go well, or it went fantastically. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be my own worst critic or anything like that, but yeah. So D&D was my first touchstone.
How old were you when you wrote and designed the official X-Men role-playing game?
Probably like 6 or 7.
Yeah, see, that's radical.
Not too far past those early crayon scribbles, actually.
I guess that's my key to go next. I think I vividly remember when I was a kid of like maybe 8 or 9, having a friend who I thought was like the most creative guy in the world, and his name was Adam. And he was like, he would always like have all these stories and things like that. And I eventually realized he was just like years later, I realized he was just like telling me about things he knew about from D&D. And like this happened to me with like I was kind of not like a pop culture kid, and so like I would be like, wow, a war among the stars, sir, tell me more. Right. And so he would tell all these things, and like his older brother had basically gotten him into D&D, so that was kind of my first exposure to it, was playing in his older brother's like long running Dark Sun game, where we were all, you know, bugs and cannibalistic halflings, which is totally my jam. I think has informed, you know, I kind of have a pet theory that I'd like to try out on people. Like, your first RPG really like deeply colors all of your experiences of you know, kind of it's kind of the taste of going forward, because I really like, you know, Dark Sun, everyone is kind of gross hobbits world. And the first major indie game that I really remember engaging with and really liking was crap, I can't remember the name. I'm going to describe it to Graham, and Graham will remember the name.
This is my favorite game. Go.
Yeah, your orcs. It's deeply informed by the idea that like it's trying to come up with a culture for orcs. You're exploring orcish culture and making orcs seem like, oh, of course, this is why they do the things they do.
Hill people?
And they have this deep religion where they believe in like instant karma. And so if anything good happens, an orc has to like immediately cause mayhem, because they have to balance it out. They have to balance the scales in real time, and they're always worried about trouble. So
Well, yeah,
it's like,
Orc
don't
the
attract
Masquerade.
eye
I played a
God,
lot of
trouble.
Orc the Masquerade
Right, yeah.
in
So
college.
It's kind of like that. So anyway, I remember this game. I think it's just called Orcs, but I remember it very, very vividly as kind of this first exploration of like, not, you know, RPGs aren't just about rolling dice and crunching numbers. They're about this kind of exploring these alternate realities. And so I remember that one very clearly. And, you know, again, I like it because you're very, you know, struggling in a mediocre world, trying to do mediocre things.
I also love Dark Sun. Of all the WotC settings, I think Dark Sun's like way up here, and like basically everything else is kind of down there. Each one kind of has its like taste. Like, you know, Eberron is pretty interesting, but Dark Sun swings for the fences in like these crazy ways. In the way that like when I started on third ed D&D when I was like 9 or 10 years old, because I didn't know there was anything else. I wasn't exposed to the idea. I was just told that this is a story that you're interacting in. It's like a video game, but with no electricity. You make story decisions, but you also make mechanical decisions. And that was enough to completely hook in my brain. And I stopped doing the car factions and the action figures, of which I had X-Men, would write my own X-Men comics using action figures. They
But
get
Graham,
blown up.
I'm saying there's a really obvious mashup with Car Faction RPG and Dark Sun RPG.
Well, I
which
need you
is
to put a
just
pin.
Fury Road. It's called Fury Road.
Fury Road. Tell me more, pop culture icon Patrick Wilson.
You'll have to ask my friend Adam.
Okay.
Everybody
Adam,
knows
your
him.
friend who's a charlatan and a liar, right?
I'm not sure. Yeah, probably. Yes. I guess so.
Alexi,
Sorry.
you already said your first game, which was Dread, right? It was like
That's
your first.
right. Yeah, I jumped the gun. I guess.
No,
Let me
you're
give
just
credit
too smart.
to. Let me give credit to the first full campaign that
Sure.
I ran, and that was my first experience of, you know, campaign length role playing, and that was Masks by Magpie Games, which is their fantastic young superhero powered by the apocalypse game about, you know, teenagers with superpowers trying to find their place in the world. And I ran a campaign of that lasted more than a year. By the end, everyone had changed playbooks, and we had introduced a, you know, secondary team of, you know, promoted NPCs that were our backup PCs. So it was a big hit with the players, and kind of, you know, cemented me as a role player because of how, you know, how special that campaign was.
That's awesome. Masks is a great game. I don't play a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse. There's a lot to choose from. Masks is definitely one of the best ones out there. My favorite portion is in the back of the book. has nothing to do with mechanics, but it's all story and narrative and deconstruction of story, which is kind of my jam as a writer and as a structuralist. I've always been kind of obsessed with it.
There's some great guidance for thinking about plot hooks and plot arcs. Just kind of a little crash course in superhero plotting for the GM.
It's hands down my favorite part of the book. And speaking of jumping the gun in delightful ways, I wanted to ask everybody how that you first started thinking about design. And Dustin already started me off with that because you were bold, 7 years old. Okay, I'm gonna make crayons. I'm gonna make X-Men.
Let's I mean, bold or dumb, because
Fine line, my friend.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard. We all know, like, it's hard to make a game, and it's hard to make it work, especially when you're trying to draw your own illustrations and you're still doing the like big club feet that just turn out both ways, I mean, that was the first one, and then I have just been kind of hacking things up ever since then, and it always starts off really like, I don't intend to make something. I don't set out and say, oh, I'm gonna make a game. It usually starts off in increments, like, oh, this is a cool game, but what if we changed this? And then drawn out to its natural conclusion, a few months later, I'm like, I'm writing an entirely new thing, aren't I? I'm not just hacking this game. I have completely reinvented it.
I'd say that that's a pretty common way for people to get into game design. The old homebrew. Oh, yeah, I'm a role player. Great. Tell me more about your game. Oh, it's a homebrew. I hear that more often than, oh, we're just playing 5e. Like, I feel like what's inherent to role-playing games and what's exciting to me in terms of design is the fact that people do feel this agency and this ability to do it, but they don't make a point out of it until all of a sudden there's I'm a designer, because we have designer board games and kind of minor celebrities within this niche world that we live in. Oh my God, it's Jason Morningstar, who's a lovely guy, but I absolutely flipped out when I saw him at a small con and I went and talked to him and he was perfectly reasonable. So the idea that designer is this big thing is, I think, kind of a misnomer, because people are hacking and homebrewing all the time, and I think it's a beautiful thing. Gabrielle, I'd love to know about when you started thinking about design, transitioning from being a role player into what can I put some of myself into?
Well, I'll definitely keep giving credit to the Anyone Comics and Anyone RPGs sort of crowd, because it was such a supportive community there that I was on the sort of player to GM to designer pipeline, and almost even explicitly. I remember the folks there, after I was playing for a while, they're like, okay, so when are you going to run a game? And then after I started running games for a while, they're like, okay, so when are you going to write a game? And I remember when they said, so when are you going to write a game? I remember being like, oh no, I'm sure that if that ever happens, it'll be years and years from now. But then for me, it was sort of a discovery of an opportunity from real life to translate it into a game. I was celebrating the holiday of Passover with my cousin, and that is a ritual storytelling holiday where there are rules and you collaboratively tell a story. And and he's a LARPer, and by the end of it, I was like, oh, okay, this is already halfway to an RPG. And then it was just, but at first it was just an errant thought. And I have a lot of those, and usually nothing ever comes of them. But it was the fact that I collaborated with my cousin, the fact that he's someone who always, this is Ben Bisogno, who I co-wrote Manishina with, and he is someone who always makes things, and I'm someone who has ideas and then doesn't make them. And so by us working together, it really, that's, I think, what brought me to that place. If it had just been me, and now here I am making, games left and right by myself. But that was definitely the push that brought me here.
Community's important, vital, similar to the designer thing. I think a much more common one is the separation between player and facilitator or DM. And I've always been ferociously against that. People are put on these Gygaxian towers, but and players are treated like they're empty vessels for story to be just subjected to them. And for me, that's everything I'm against, because I love the collaborative nature, and it's very exciting for me that indie games continue to mutate and get more complicated and find new ground. I mean, just listening to you describe the list of games, Gabrielle, makes me so excited about like folklore and Jewish tradition, and like I'm like yes, and I'm getting this RPG energy that like makes me very, very, very happy and very excited to be there. Who hasn't talked about their when they started thinking about design first?
I've got stuff to say.
Yeah, you do?
There were a couple wonderful things that helped kind of draw me into game design, and one of them was the 200-word RPG contest. This is a annual contest challenging people to design a whole game in a very small package. You don't think about exactly how short 200 words are until you're trying to fit rules into that space, right? So I entered that with a little seed of a game idea, right? You have to kind of be very, very kind of elliptical and evocative to fit it into that space. And eventually I would expand that game into a fuller game called Wayfarer's End, which got published in the Codex magazine. So I want to credit also Codex magazine and Gauntlet Publishing for helping to put that out and take my kind of little 200-word RPG idea, let me build it a little bit and make it a published game in Codex, which was my first like real game publication. That's a game, by the way, about a small town full of dark secrets that you play using a vintage cookbook as the resolution mechanic.
A specific vintage cookbook?
No, just any vintage cookbook. Like you go to
so like you grab one off your. It's like
you go to a used bookstore. You find a vintage cookbook, or you like borrow it from your grandparents, and then that becomes how you determine the way the scenes work out in the game. You flip through it and decide, is this recipe one I would be willing to make or not, and that will determine the tone of the scene that you play out, whether it is homespun or unsettling.
I love site-specific theater, and I love found things as mechanics. One of my favorite party games is called Bring Your Own Book, and essentially it's like a card czar game, like apples to apples, except you have to find a book in the place you're in, and you answer the questions using passages of the book. I love the cookbook thing. That's incredible. It looks like what? Sorry,
I was
Pat.
gonna say the level of eldritch horror is set by like the level of consommes that are in the
Oh
cookbook.
yeah. Well, if you get the
My
right
souffle
cookbook,
is fallen. It's the dark gods.
if you get the right cookbook, things get unsettling fast.
Okay, now I'm doubly intrigued. It looks like from the wide internet, from Ryan. We have a question, which is from Crafty Kaiju, which is, how is the global pandemic? Ooh, we're going in hard already. How is the global pandemic and remote gaming influenced the way you design games? This is to anybody, if anybody wants to take this.
Ben and I started developing Manishina right when the pandemic hit. And so while the game, and it was really radical for our game, which was supposed to be about a shared meal around a table, right? And so originally we thought all of the rituals in the game would be, okay, now you share a drink, now you break the matzah, right? But instead we ended up having to develop, all of our playtesting was on Zoom, right? So for a year we're developing this game and no one is meeting anyone in person. So we had to radically reimagine what those rituals would look like, and it turned out to be an amazing experience. And now I have to actually we had to go back and actually make the in-person rituals good enough, because we discovered things like turning off your Zoom camera like at a certain time, right? Or like really like using the what you had, and also we had things like people sharing from objects from around their home, right? So we found the way to kind of create a shared space through Zoom, but it was extremely challenging at first and really it really was a shock at first, so different from how we had originally envisioned the game.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I wrote this game with my partner Nat called Business Wizards, which is a satirical game about the world of business, and you play it in person, and the in-person rituals are all like rip-offs of like agile project planning things. So like the wizards cast spells by writing them on sticky notes, and you do a SWOT analysis on the board to determine what what your adventure should be and what your major threats are and things like that. And it's uproariously funny played in person. We had all these rituals for it, and then right when it gets released, the pandemic hit, but it actually weathered it pretty well, because what happened was all of the rituals of work moved into another satirical space, which is the Zoom meeting. And so you run it on Zoom, and I've done things where like people make like PowerPoint presentations to like give as the conclusion to the adventure, and they can all like collaborate with them online. And so the fact that the pandemic changed the world of work to be this other horrible thing from the horrible thing it was before worked really well with the game, because it's pretty, it's silly wherever the world happens to be. And so in the pandemic, now that everybody is interacting through this other medium, naturally you adapt all your things to your satire to be for this other medium, and it just kind of happened that way. We didn't do much planning to make it end up that way.
It sounds appropriately awful.
One of my friends got mad at me because I took his weekend away. He
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
I do this at work. Why would you do this?
Yeah, the kind of remote gaming paradigm has just kind of rejiggered some of my priorities in playtesting. It kind of pulls to the fore games that I know I can run online, right? If it's like, all right, this is a PBTA game, for example, if we have a character keeper and we have a online dice roller, we're going to be able to do it. But if a game is, if a game has card-based mechanics or involves like, kind of a physical prop like the Jenga tower in Dread, then it's more like, why don't I kind of put that in the folder of, to test when I can play more games in person, right? So it's, rejiggered my priorities, I guess, where there are some games I'm looking forward to doing more design work on and more testing on when it's an easier proposition to gather people in person to play.
A favorite mechanic of the indie world is the 3x5 card. I would be lying if I said I hadn't made many games with 3x5 cards myself. Definitely a watershed moment where I'm like, I don't need 20 kinds of math. I want to employ the people at the table to create their worlds and then react to what's happening. And one of my favorite games next to Dread is a game called Microscope. And in it, you have a timeline. It's a timeline creation game. And there were a couple tools in the gaming space that became very, very popular in the pandemic. A tabletop simulator, which was basically universal ownership, and Roll20, which was in use before, but certainly many of the people who I knew who kind of ignored it were using it more regularly during lockdown. And I am still looking for a 3x5 card that I can edit and move around replacement online, and it's weirdly impossible. There's playing cards is common. Oh, you're randomizing stuff. But all I want to do is write on a card and move it around.
Who was it who said that indie game design is 90% writing sad things on index cards?
There is a T-shirt. There is a T-shirt exists, which is just cards and it says sad things on it.
Brilliant. Well observed.
Did you talk about your jump into game design, Pat?
Vaguely, I guess. I've long been accused of being a game designer by people who play games with me.
I would never.
I'll always be like, let's just play it this way, right? Whenever rules ambiguities come up or whether something like that, I'm like, it doesn't matter. We'll just do this thing. This will be fun. And then that kind of sensibility meant that whenever I was playing games or running games, I would hack extensively. And so there was a time when I actually competed in this board game contest. Competition's the wrong word. Collaborated in this design communities board game construction jam sort of thing, which is actually this multi-week thing where people play test together and work on developing a game. It's in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and it's called the Kudo Plays Design Contest. And it was really, really enjoyable and wonderful, and it felt very natural to do because of the backstory of just like, I'll try this mechanic, right? And so it it didn't feel like a big transition or like I got into game design at that. It was just like that was the first time I was formally designing games. That's actually probably not true. I was working on all sorts of, like, I contributed to like the community development of like this card game. There was like a card game that everybody worked on together. Like I've just been doing it so long that it seems like I don't know how people play games normally. I just assume that what you do is you hack your own stuff together, and that's how you make your own fun.
And you know what it is, and it's what's brought us all here, because all of us have one thing in common, and that's is although we started designing, we all have designs in 9th levels, level 1 supplement. This is a 3rd year run. It's been going, and this year was mythology, and all 5 of us, shocker, have a game in there. I would love to go around and have people talk about their games and have the rest of us pick it apart. Just kidding. Talk about your game. Here's the new rule. Every time anybody says a game either they've made or are pitching, everyone has to be super enthusiastic and encouraging about like what a great game it is. That's the new rule and the new game we're going to play, okay? Is a meta game within our hangout. Great?
I love this game. This game
So
sounds
do
wonderful.
I do too. Thank you, Alexi. He gets it. All right, let's go around. I would love to hear about your game in level 1. With Gabrielle.
Sure thing. My game in this anthology is called The Victor's Tale, and I wrote it specifically for this. I found out about the level 1 anthology from a friend of mine, Whitney Delaglio, who had a game in the first, the Little Tusks in the first. I think that's the game that's in the first one.
Whitney's great, and her game is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very. I love everything that she does. And so she told me about it, and she said you should submit a game, and I was excited about it. And when I found out that the theme was myths and legends, I was like, oh great, like this is my jam. Like I won't have any trouble with this. But I really like game jams or game like targeted things like that, themes, because then I have a little seed I can plant in my brain and go do other things, and then like a week later be like, okay, like it's sprouting, I have an idea. And so I thought about things I had never done before and that I wanted to try. I was like, I've never done a 2-player game, and I usually like avoid dice. So I was like, okay, my challenge is it has to be a 2-player game with dice. That's what the criteria I set for myself. And when I think about myths and legends, my first thought is that they're stories that we tell, and that someone is telling that story. And so I wanted my game to be about that. And so my game is a 2-player game where one person plays a monstrous hero and the other person plays a heroic monster. And each of you thinks of yourself as the protagonist of your own story. And it's a dice pull game. You're rolling dice to find out who wins each bout of the fight. But what you're really fighting over is who gets to tell the story, right? And at the end, when one person wins, yes, your hit points are down to 0, but really now you get to recount the whole story from your perspective, and the other person is not allowed to say anything. And that's my game in a nutshell. And it was really fun to write, and it was fun to. The illustrations come from Evelyn Moreau, who, if people don't already know about her Patreon and the fact that you can get access to just an incredible library of art that you can then use in your games for free or for the cost of being a patron, it's an amazing resource. So, between her art and some help from some friends, my friend Callie Karras helped me play test and get because there's math in this game, which is usually not my thing. So she helped me out with that, and yeah, that's the Victor's Tale in a nutshell.
That sounds great.
I loved reading Victor's Tale. I identify as a structuralist, and so you had this perfect cyclical thing of the title, being intrigued, and then getting all the way to the end, and then your final line is, "This is not your story to tell." And then I thought about it, and I flipped back and said, so clever. I love the beginning and the end kind of tied it back together. It was a joy to read.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really evocative, that one. And when I was reading it, I just had these it's just very visual, right? Like these incredible images of, people wrestling and fighting and all the old stories of then their fight lasted for 6 days or something like that. I who even has the energy for that? Not me. But yeah, no, it was great. It conjured so many like really compelling images in my mind as I was reading it.
I was gonna save this for later on, but I'm gonna use it now. This is my like cool idea that I really think all of these games express. I really think this is really probably the one that does it best, actually, because I've been having this conversation with a lot of designers recently, and games are kind of like books first. A lot of these games are books first, and they're meant to be like something that you read and enjoy and you think about the story of and you have the experience of, and that's like your first and sometimes only experience with the game, because you don't play, you read many more games than you play. And I think that as a designer over time, I've tried to make my writing for the game more fun to read and more about evoking these cool images as are evoked in this game, and less about making sure everybody knows how to play, because I'm realizing as the more I do it, like actually the 0th order version of the game is reading the text of it. And so I just thought that this was one of my favorite examples of like using the artifact itself to itself have this sort of quality of, as I read it, I am playing this sort of game and it is sort of playing with me, and I'm having a fun experience. And at the end of it, when I get to that last line, I'm like, oh, I've been had. This was the game the whole time, right? And I thought that was a really cool call out. I'll do that for yours too, Dustin. That was when I was planning to use it for yours, but I'll say exactly that word for word.
Thank you. You're a professional, and I appreciate you. Who wants to talk about their game?
I'd love to hear about Alexi's game, actually, because I haven't.
There you go.
That's one that I haven't had a chance to actually read yet. So
Yeah,
the wielder of the Blade of Ages, right?
To wield the Blade of Ages.
To wield.
To wield the Blade of Ages. Yes, because you, the player, the claimant, have to prove that you are worthy to wield the Blade of Ages, and perhaps more to the point, that nobody else is worthy to wield the Blade of Ages. So this is a comedic high fantasy game that draws a lot of inspiration from one of my favorite humorous role-playing games, and that is Mission Accomplished by Jeff Stormer. So Mission Accomplished is a kind of espionage corporate satire game where you play as super spies after a successful mission, fighting over who deserves credit and blame for what went wrong and what went right during that mission. To wield the Blade of Ages takes some of those themes and mechanics and puts them in this fantasy world where a number of claimants have reached the top of the Spire of Ages, and they are now going to recount aspects of their epic quest to get here in ways that make them look good and the other claimants look bad, because everybody needs to impress the sword keeper, who is the GM or facilitator role in the game, in order to prove that they, and only they, are worthy of wielding the Blade of Ages. And the sword keeper is encouraged to be as arbitrary and difficult to please as possible in handing out their merit and condemnation dice to the various claimants. So the hope
just
is
like
it creates
real storekeepers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the hope is it creates some fruitful chaos around the gaming table as people vie to frame the quest in the terms that look best for them and worst for the fellow claimants.
Shout out to Jeff Stormer.
Oh yeah,
Alexa, you made a great choice in picking that as your inspiration. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that Mission Accomplished is mission : accomplished.
Exclamation point.
And not unlike Business Wizards, Patrick, it's kind of a satire of like the business world. So you're spies, but you're all like trying to undercut each other. And so taking that and kind of this energy of the victor's tale, again, themes that are all sort of implied, and I love that all these designs are pulling from it, is the idea that like we're all going to tell a tale and it's going to come from something, and then who gets to tell that tale and why is that powerful? And for Mission Accomplished and to wield the Sword of Ages, it's because I'm the one who gets to tell it, not you. Haha.
Yeah, I will say one little twist on that is at the end of To Wield the Blade of Ages, the person who scores the highest on the final dice roll gets the sword, right? But the person who scores the second highest gets to tell how that first person is remembered in 100 years.
Alexi, I think it's really cool that you're embracing like PvP in this game. Like, I think that that could be something that, especially people maybe not as much in the indie scene, can feel nervous about. Right? There's this idea that like we have to all be a party, a team that's like always working together. But I think so much fun. I think it's a skillful designer who can build a game around that and make people feel safe to be antagonistic. And I think the fact that your game is so playful is really supportive of that, and probably leads to people feeling comfortable opposing each other in that way.
Yeah, thank you. I think a helpful thing is it's set after the epic quest, so there's no question of like, oh, if we don't like work together, will we fail? No, you've succeeded mostly, but now you're kind of subtly bickering about who deserves the most credit, and you get the chance to do that without a worry that this will sabotage your success.
Yeah, I like how it uses the as Gabriel points out, like indie games are often very cautious about like having kind of dark and competitive and throwing elbows fractious emotions in it. And I think that the one of the positives about this game is that it gives an opportunity for those emotions to be let out in a valuable space, right? Instead of having them be like, they're kind of the point of the game. You kind of, when someone does something that would be incredibly edgelordy and ridiculous in any other game context, here we all go, oh, that's so great, right? You've just flipped the values framework around so well with the way that the frame story is assembled and the way that the mechanics push people to make those sorts of silly, self-aggrandizing, ridiculous, over the top, this game is about me moves. Yes. Which would normally be like the worst kind of thing to have in an improv session, are now like the most hilarious thing to build off of.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's the hope.
Awesome. Dustin, what game did you design for level 1?
So I designed a game called Battle of the Bards, and I'm gonna make a liar out of myself because I said earlier that usually I start by hacking things, and when it came to designing this, I didn't hack anything, and in fact the mechanics were sort of really secondary to the concept of the game. I was shoving things into the game in a way and playtesting them to see if they worked. So what happened was I was taking a course with a really brilliant instructor who I think many of us probably know, Nat. And Nat referred me to the submission and said, oh yeah, it seems like this is really right up your alley. And I said, oh, that's really great. Cool, yeah, I'd love to submit something sometime. And they said, no, you have to submit it now, it's due in a week. And so for a week I did nothing but chip away at this game. And it was really useful to me, actually, because I tend to over-engineer things and I try and make really big, epic things. And so this was a fun way for me to play with something that was a little bit more short form, that was something that was a one-shot, something that was a little goofier. And so Battle of the Bards is a game where there is really no game master facilitator to speak of, although someone can sort of guide things. And you all play a bard of your own quick creation, and then following that, you are prompted to write a song of a random number of lines about a random topic. And then after you have written it, you are encouraged to then perform it in front of all of your fellow gamers. And following that, there's a quick little mechanic that says, okay, well, here is the person who won the Battle of the Bards. And I think similarly to the to wield the Blade of Ages, there is sort of a scene where someone gets to narrate, okay, here's why this song lasts through the ages, here's why this song is remembered, and it's just as goofy as you think it is. And I had a really great time playtesting it to prepare it for publication. And yeah, the idea of generative gaming where you are actually creating a lore and a mythos, creating poetry or songs, that's a big deal to me. I like to play with that in games.
I love the verse generator. Go ahead, Alexi.
Oh, just to say, I love that the game, requires and invites players to perform, right? Like, because of course, a big part of this hobby is a desire to perform, but still sometimes you need that like bonus kind of permission or push from the game itself to be like, no, really, we want you to perform. We want to see what you can do. And of course, because there's this, framework that is a little bit lighthearted to it, right? Like it gives people a little bit of extra leeway for that, I think.
Yeah, in
I adore
playtesting,
the song chart. Oh God, I did it again. Please, Justin.
No, I was just going to say, in playtesting, we found that there are definitely the folks who will say, I'm not going to sing this. I'm just going to read this aloud, and then there are the folks who will leave the room and then drape themselves in a blanket and then angle their camera and will come burst into the room on camera and sing their song. It's a blast.
I think it's sometimes very hard to try and find the rhyme. It helps, I think, to talk like William Shakespeare all the time. This game is the break in the middle of this game, like I think that an undervalued enjoyment for me in this game was how I have to say nice things, but I have to say this way, like how utterly like stressful I felt during the write down the song portion of it, like the level of wanting to succeed at this writing a song contest that you have managed to achieve for me is so high that I really want to write a good one. That I'm so mad when I hear everyone else's, and I'm so like into the verses that I write. Like I feel like that cooking moment in the middle of it is so nicely framed, and I really love / hate the experience of being in that moment. Right, seeing the payoff is of course like so awesome, but I really think that I enjoyed the stress associated with that cooking time a lot.
Thank you very much.
That sounds like a freeing and exciting playtest with such a positive teaching influence. And there's quite a lot of thematic connection between Dustin's game and Pat's. So while we still have time before we transition over, it's almost like I planned this. I'm going to ask, because it seems like both of you designed your games from the top down from a rad name, and you came up with a rad name, and you're like, okay, what is my game going to be?
I disagree. We struggled so hard with this name, Graham. You have no idea how long we worked on the title. I wrote this game with my partner Nat, who was the teacher in Dustin's group.
Plot twist.
Plot twist. Yeah. It's a double plot twist because we had the first game in the book and the last game in the book, and they're both like epic storytelling games. And then we have two musical themed ridiculous games in the middle of the book next. So the game I created with my partner Nat is called Gods of Rock, and it came from two sources. The first is we had played a number of what I would call kind of relationship.
Keep going, Pat.
Okay, we played a number of relationship games. So a good example is something like Fog of Love, and we kind of mutually decided that I'm sorry if Fog of Love's your favorite game. I'm not actually throwing shade here, but for me, those kinds of relationship games are no fun at all. Like they're negative fun. Like I don't want to have relationship conversations with people about fictional topics and fictional relationships. Like I get enough of that at home, right? Like that this is to me like not a great experience. And so we wanted to make a relationship game that wasn't lame. And the other thing that we did is one of my favorite movies of all time that I recently shared with them is a obscure indie movie called Six String Samurai. The plot of which is that it's a post-apocalyptic United States in an alternative history where the bomb dropped in the 50s and Elvis was crowned king in Las Vegas. And after Elvis's death, Buddy Holly is making his way to Vegas to fighting death with a katana on the way to be the next king of rock and roll. And we were like, that's a pretty good setting. And so the game is a relationship game, but the relationship is between two rock and rollers / swordsmen. So you have a guitar in one hand and a katana in the other hand, and you're fighting a duel with each other. And you go through a lot of the same relationship prompts that you would get in a game like Fog of Love. So like, what's your love language? But it's like, yeah. Thanks, Ryan. So you get a bunch of prompts that are kind of relationship prompts, but you're fighting the ultimate duel. And every time you answer one of these questions together, like where did you meet? What was it that brought you together? When did the breakup become inevitable, right? You flip a coin and you see which one of you successfully stabs the other one during this crash of the duel. And in the last coin flip, someone dies. And the last question is, was it better to live or die? And so it's like one of the most metal games we've ever had the pleasure of composing. And I really enjoy playing it. There's a lot of like, it's very intense. It's super intense.
I wrote down a series of questions when I was reading your game. And the first one was, would you like to tell me how much you like Six String Samurai? So I'm glad you brought it up prior to me. Because in that movie, Buddy Holly uses rock and roll, but he fights death. He uses the power of heavy metal. And so they clash using their two styles. And I also love the fact that the mechanic of your game, it's all coin flips, but then the final one is the one that decides life or death, completely separate from the other coin flips, their decision. So it's not like you have like a power meter or any other idea of momentum. It's a simple binary thing that occurs at the end, life and death, and everything else that led up to it is irrelevant. And I find that to be delightfully nihilist.
We thought through every pattern of possible coin flips that you could get to see if there were any duds in stories. There are no duds. Even if one person just absolutely beats the other person into the ground, it is dark and intense and it really, really works.
I loved them so much, Stab. I remember when we got ice cream together, Stab, and he did die, and maybe it wasn't worth it.
I just want to like really quickly jump off of this conversation, and I see a question in the chat about mechanics I like in other games, because this idea of relationship games that are or aren't explicitly about relationships. A friend of mine and fellow game designer, Ben Wallace, has a game coming out soon called Broken, which is a relationship game. It's about a relationship that is ending, and you're playing out the end of a relationship. But it has a mechanic where you literally break things, or popsicle sticks or index cards if you don't want to break stuff. But I love breaking stuff. It's so cool, and it's in that vein of ritual games of what can we do that is not just rolling dice. To make these things feel visceral.
That's awesome. You could combine it with a game of Dread if you're strong enough to break the Jenga tower pieces. Clever mechanic or novel rule that I've encountered recently that I want to shout out is something called The Unseen, which is a mechanic from Jason Cordova's The Between, a game about Victorian monster hunters. And it's got the whole game is designed to be very cinematic. And the Unseen is a scene taking place elsewhere in London, right? While your monster hunters are out at night trying to track down a vampire or a serial killer. And then totally separate from this, the players are prompted to take turns narrating a scene going on somewhere else in the city that just gives us a slice of life. And by cutting between that, that unseen and the scene of action, the GM of the game has a chance to help increase tension. And then the things people describe in the unseen, if they can somehow echo them in the kind of main scene, they get a little experience, benefit from it. So it's kind of a mechanic that teaches you how to do thematic intense narration. And I think it's really cool and a fun piece of technology to have out there in the RPG world.
So we're coming to the end of our first hour here of chatting. So before we go with our first group and transition over to our second group, I'd like everybody to have a chance to go around and say where we can find you online, where we can find your work, and if you could play or run in any game in any setting, what would it be? I've gotten Roger Rabbit, some friend of mine just said Space Whales. Shout out to my friends Sean and Pat. Starting with Patrick.
Okay. My name is Patrick Watson. You can find me on Twitter at PatrickDK Watson. You can also find my work at Ninth Level Games, where a lot of my RPGs are up. If I could be in any setting, I'm really super into the Uplift setting right now, where there are a bunch of technologically enhanced whales and gorillas and octopi who are hanging out with humans in the future. And I think that's a super awesome setting that I would love to play around in.
Love Uplift. Alexi.
Hey, so you can find all of my games online at Cloven Pine Games. So definitely check out Cloven Pine Games on itch.io and on Twitter, or subscribe to my gaming design Substack, Murmurs from the Cloven Pine. If I could play a campaign in any setting, I really love the Ravnica setting from Magic the Gathering. I know they've put out a D&D supplement for it, but I think if someone were running a more indie fantasy game, in that citywide plane of Ravnica, that would be really delicious to me.
Super Prague with guilds is very fun.
Oh yeah.
Dustin.
Hello. I'm Dustin Winter. Again, you can find me online on most social media at Never Say Dustin.
Dustin.
Yes.
What do you
We'll just go back. We'll just go back and forth like this, like an Abbott and Costello thing.
I'm always down.
And let's see. This is a tough question. The thing that I will tell you what I'm going to play next. So I have a friend of mine, very dear friend of mine, who is part of our regular gaming group. They are going away for about 6 weeks to teach at a summer camp. And so as soon as I get a chance, as soon as they get back, I want to tap into that summer camp energy and play some Sleepaway.
Yes.
Which I have not had a chance to do yet, and I'm very excited about.
Awesome. Takes out Gabrielle.
Sure thing. So I'm Gabrielle Rabinowitz. You can find me on itch and Twitter at Gabrielle Rab, R-A-B. And I'm very excited. I'm also already about to play this setting I'm about to describe. I've been obsessed with Our Flag Means Death lately. I can't stop rewatching it. It's bringing me the greatest joy of anything. And a designer called CHE has an ashcan, a belonging outside belonging game called Beneath Our Own Flag, where I get to play in Our Flag Means Death, and I can't wait. And some friends and I are doing it this weekend, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Amazing. All right. I'll see everybody else in a minute, but thank you to our 4 designers. And I'll see everybody else in a couple minutes.
Thanks everybody. This was awesome.
Yeah,
Take
this
care.
is wonderful.
Oh, you're still here. Hi. No, please stay. No, I have 3 new people to introduce you to. And if you're just joining us now, I'm Graham Gentz. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a game designer and writer performer, and sometimes I'm a puppet. I would love to go around and have people introduce themselves and also say, what is the first game that you remember? Jim.
Sure. I am Jim Dagg, he, him. I am an independent / hobbyist RPG designer. I've also written under the imprint of Saddle Shaped Games. The earliest game that I remember, okay, are we talking digital or are we talking tabletop?
I would be a poor host if I specified.
Okay, well then let's assume digital because the answer is far more interesting. I sat with my cousin for a good couple of months playing, believe it or not, Duke Nukem 1. If you remember
the platformer?
Yes. So if you remember the 3D guy who swears a lot, not him. No, the old one with the laser gun.
Mm-hmm. Radical. It was very, very Crystal Caves, I recall. Like,
yeah, Crystal Caves, but you actually had a health bar and scrolling. Scrolling was huge at the time on DOS.
How about you, Zane?
Hi, I'm Zane Graves, he, they. New-ish to game design, but longtime gamer. And first game I remember is ye old board game Clue. Got it for my 8th birthday, and it's still the board game I love, even though board games have come like a bajillion years since then.
Would you ever play like by yourself? Were you into the characters and the intrigue? Like, if you
I was into the style and the aesthetic,
sure,
the art of it. I did not play it because it sucks to do by yourself. Although I do remember taking Clue Master Detective and cutting out cardboard templates to go over the rooms to make new rooms to try to basically make what turned into just like, oh, this is just an RPG, but like having a like there could be a book of mystery that you could go through and have to investigate, and then I'm like, oh, I was just 9 years old and tried to hard turn Clue into a role-playing game. Go figure.
Okay, so who's your favorite character then? Who's your favorite Clue character?
Colonel Mustard.
Nice. Kyle, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Kyle Ott. I am one half of the creative partnership of Desks and Dorks. I wrote After the Rain, which is a role-playing game all about memory, where you build a character doing that, and Red Panda Redemption, which came out this year and is definitely not influenced by video games in any way, shape, or form. And I also wrote Vessel for the Level 1 anthology. And Zane, it is not shocking you're a Colonel Mustard person. Like, you have the very Colonel Mustard-ish like face.
Yeah,
like if we took the beard away, like I mean maybe it's like Colonel Relish. I don't know if it's the same or not, but like
I could go Plum. I could see Zane as a Plum.
Yeah, oh, Plum. I think I was a Plum guy.
You were a Plum guy?
Else, but I'm
Let's
not
go.
Sure. It's been a while since I've played Clue. First game I remember is Hero Quest though. Like that's
really?
Yeah. Oh,
Like
absolutely.
first?
My mom bought that at a yard sale.
Wow.
And like we were in upstate New York visiting my grandparents, and like I don't know if you guys have had that experience, but like old people sometimes have nothing to do in their homes.
Yeah.
So it literally felt like the planets aligned. Like she walks into the door, she's like, "Oh, we picked this up," and then just dropped it on the coffee table, and it was like, oh, we were like, yes, we wrecked that game. I mean, that game is it's an antique now, but it's in pieces all over several different homes in several different states across the country, I'm sure at this point. But yeah, Hero Quest is the first one that I remember like vividly.
I never had Hero Quest. At grandparents' houses, I would make a lot of like dams and streams and like playing with sticks and dirt, because I definitely didn't have any rad D&D-esque board games to play with.
We did a lot of the stick hitting too, and I think Hero Quest led to a marked jump in the stick hitting.
Totally.
Like the barbarian has a big stick. We could probably get bigger ones to hit each other with. So that might have been why that miniature went missing first. I'm not sure if my mom had anything to do with that or not, but.
And unfortunately, we're missing Glenn tonight because Glenn was swallowed by a giant clam, which is probably going to be the game that I submit to level 1 next year. So look forward to that in the endings and epilogues edition of year 4. So everybody has like their clue influences, and Zane has already touched a little bit about design, RP design, and Hero Quest is, you know, a big siphon there. So I'm curious about everyone's first introduction into RP, into more of a what you might imagine your tabletop role-playing games.
I mean, I think I speak for a lot of people where like Dungeons and Dragons was the first introduction, really. I mean, my brother and I didn't know about the game until we found the books in a public library and didn't know where to find them, didn't know where to get them. There wasn't like a friendly local game store where we grew up. And so we wound up cobbling together just this Frankenstein version of the game with like a 2nd edition player's handbook, but a 3rd edition monster manual and a 1st edition set of adventures. So it was a wild time to be alive. But I mean, I don't think that was a good start, but I really think what did it for me was Dread. Was Dread or Fiasco, which were the 2 games where I was like, oh man, you can do so many amazing things with storytelling. Like I played the first game of Fiasco with people who had never touched a role-playing game before, and it was amazing to watch the stuff they came up with. Like I think that we had a shootout at like a male stripper bar at one point. Like one person became a priest. It felt like a Coen Brothers movie, and it felt like a Coen Brothers movie with like 3 people who had never touched a role-playing game or a dice before, unless it was like to play Monopoly. Yeah, it was astounding, and I was like, this is what I have been missing. Like D&D is great, but like going from D&D to Fiasco and Dread was like a whole different experience. It was like the difference between going to like a Razor scooter and a Maserati. It was wild.
Epi must be smiling on us because in the second hour, this is our first hour, this is the second time somebody's called out Dread specifically, and Dread is 100% of my top 3 favorite role-playing games of all time. And the one that fundamentally changed how I thought about what was possible was Fiasco. I played Fiasco, and I'm already a writer and a structuralist, and so no dice, no character sheets, the narratively charged elements being what you needed. Like this is the stuff that I was building understanding, and I didn't know it from reading books and watching movies and doing role playing. And so Fiasco said, oh no, I know what you've been doing in the back of your head. Here it is. And I was like, yeah, Jason, you smart devil. You know, so that's what got me there.
And Graham, I don't know if it's the same thing for you, but I wind up playing a lot of role-playing games with people who are really unfamiliar with that genre. And I think what does it for me, you know, why Dread I think is so perfect and so evocative is there's often a disconnect. I think when there's like a new player, they're like, okay, so I roll this thing, and then a thing happens in the game, right? And especially for new players who haven't done a whole lot, like there's a disconnect between action in game versus action out of game. Dread is just like, here's this tower, good luck, chuckleheads. Like, it's awesome because there's that tension of, oh my God, like if I screw this up, I am just literally toast. And new players just immediately, they get it. And I think that's what's the brilliance of that design is it puts the stuff that happens in the headspace and in the story on the table in that tower. It's brilliant.
It makes you scared. In horror, either fiction or games, the idea is when will you be scared? When will you feel danger? It's impossible to not feel that with it's a metaphor, the tower being there. And it's, you know, thank you.
It's the perfect marriage of form and function. It's like what Hitchcock always did. The tension is there from the start and it just keeps getting worse.
I think by removing the fact there's no math element to it, absolutely helps it. Like it's like it pull block did fall, you know, like it's a very easy if then statement instead of, you know, like I don't know which die to use, and also I don't know why a 9-on-1 die is not great, but a 9 on another's, you know, amazing. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to have to explain that, especially if I'm running those one shot.
I've been kind of finding that, you know, the games that I gravitate toward are exactly that kind of game. The ones that, you know, and it doesn't matter whether it's a rules light game or rules heavy game or whatever, but just get as much shit out of the way between player sits down with character sheet and player does awesome thing. Right? Like, I know it's not an indie game, but, you know, one of the biggest games I can think of that exemplifies that very well is the Numenera and the derivatives of the Cypher system, I think are like D&D as I wish I had learned it, if that makes any sense. But then PBTA, you see that a lot, especially the ones that stick around with like the 7 to 9, 10 plus ephemera. it doesn't matter what you're rolling. You see the dice hit the table, you know immediately what's about to go down, right?
I think that's another.
Absolutely. Go ahead,
sorry.
Kyle.
No, I was gonna say, I think that's something that like I have glommed onto now with every like role playing games that I really enjoy playing or role playing games that I enjoy making. Now that I've got like made 3 in 7 months, has been there needs to be some opportunity I think for the players to feel awesome. And there is like dreads again, just to go back to that as our example, like when they pull the one wobbly block from the bottom and the whole tower just sinks and doesn't fall and everyone at the table goes ballistic, it's perfect. Because you don't have to describe how your awesome character smites a Hydra with their +4 gloves of Hydra smiting or whatever. Like everyone knows it's awesome because everyone saw you be awesome. And I think that's just such a slam dunk for storytelling.
And even if you screw it up, right? You absolutely just screw the pooch and you are absolutely dead. You're still awesome, except now you're telling about your awesome death scene. Right, all of the cameras on you, and it's like, yeah, come at me. This is great. I'm gonna go out with a bang.
Yeah, I love a game that makes failure fun.
Right,
Zane, you used a phrase "if then," and I was hoping to circle back and have you kind of talk more about the use of "if" and "then" in either when you run a game or if you're designing a game. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that for anybody who is not familiar with that structure.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've done a lot of time in a lot of different kind of games. I help staff LARPs. I've done every from Planescape of my first game of actual role-playing games. So I had someone who knew what they were doing playing Planescape. It's my first intro to Dungeons and Dragons. So everything after that sucks. Because I'm like, Dungeons and Dragons, it's not Planescape. It ain't that first time playing Planescape. This ain't good. For me personally. So I've seen everything, and especially like in a LARP situation where I would see people write plots and I'm like, cool, but if the players fail, this stops. And at no point in my how I write, adventures or anything like that, failure should never stop the forward motion of the story. It absolutely has to keep going. I never want to ask a player for a roll if them failing, if I don't have an answer for them failing. It's like, oh, you picked the lock. It's like, oh, I can't open it. I'm like, yeah, shit, I don't know. I just hate being in that situation because trying to pull something out of my ass that's like, I don't know how to make this fun. Okay, just open the fucking door. Yeah. It takes you an hour, but you open the door, sort of thing.
I couldn't agree more. For me, structurally in role playing and what I've been thinking about for a long time and continue to take into both designs and then games that I run with friends or new people at cons. The idea that this binary success failure thing is sort of embedded into an older style of role playing, that I roll a die and there's a target number. This is a pretty common way to design, but it stops the flow immediately. If the idea that you're trying to kill a monster, okay, well then you have a binary result. I hit it and I do damage, or you miss, and then we move on and we're not very interested in what you did. Or the lock picking one is a fantastic thing. Or I have in my head, is again, prep is death. I don't like prepping over things because then you're not listening to the players. I'm more interested in you figuring out what I've made.
Well, preparing is important. Preparing gets my head in the space.
Sometimes.
And I'm willing to throw literally everything out the second we start game. But as long as I've prepared myself for the scenario, I'm like, okay, this is all suggestion.
The huge memeing of my players aren't listening to me and I threw out my dungeon, I think could all be avoided if you listen to your players and you didn't over prep, because then you don't care about what they want.
Right.
But your example of picking the lock is another great example. I roll a die. Well, why are we using dice? Why do I have a character sheet? Why do I have these numbers? Well, you do it or you don't do it. And I don't do it and I still have this problem. Nothing has changed in the scenario. Phrases that have been used in the post Powered by the Apocalypse world are like fail forward. And so I am frustrated with the lack of description about how do you play the game when I read it and then everyone does it differently. because there's a bit of magic to what Kyle was describing as a kid. 3 different books, 3 different systems, you smash it together, and I guess we're playing a game. But now we're in 2022, and there are 1,000 different games with 1,000 different things. You know, nobody's in the dark anymore. So how do you teach culture, and how do you teach the structure of play in an important way when people are just, oh, I guess this is how I do it. It's just kind of the way that people
Graham, can I piggyback off of that?
I would love it. Would love if you did that.
Because one of the things that I do outside of the game design space and, like, you know, the quote unquote the serious work, the artistic work, is I run a Dungeons and Dragons group for kids. And if you have never crammed 4 15-year-olds, 2 9-year-olds, and a 6-year-old into a room and just seen what chaos happens, as a game master, a writer, a creator, I highly encourage everybody to do it, because children are literally just walking chaos, and it's great. But the when you're talking about prep, like if the lock breaks, are they just screwed? I remember vividly, my favorite example so far of any of the games that I've done with them was they're in the starting town, right? Every game has a starting town, village, caravan, whatever. You want the players to get in, get out, and get to the next adventure. This was supposed to take maybe 5 minutes. And the one kid's like, well, we have a bunch of gold. Let's just buy a base, like a house. That sounds smart. And one kid who has like a business is just like, or wants to make a business, was like, why don't we just buy whatever local business is here? We can just stash our crap upstairs in the attic, and it makes money for us while we're already making money adventuring. This spawned, I shit you not, like a 3-hour-long session of them interviewing local shopkeepers, buying the
Tell us an
tavern.
example of how you failed at work.
No, this is winning, because they're just like, what are we going to do next?
No,
And
that's the interview. I'm not. No,
Oh.
you did great. That's
Yeah.
the kids. Me being the kids interviewing people.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. And they did too, because they're like, okay, this one makes a lot of money. And then the quietest kid in the group just goes, yeah, but we need to interview the staff to make sure that they're efficient, because otherwise we're going to have to fire them and hire new people. And that's going to be a hassle. I kid you not. They pulled out, one kid had their tablet with them and went on Google Sheets and just started calculating all of the potential costs for the business. Within 3 hours, they had found a black mold. They had caught someone who'd been stealing supplies from the pantry, and they had cleared out a space where they could have dueling bagpipe fights, because they're like, well, people are going to want to watch a show while they eat here. Like, it was, it was like Brick Chickens or something was the name of their business. They're like, we guys, think about it. We can franchise. I was like, oh my God, the adventure is that way. And you people are making a menu. And
You've
it's
invented
awesome.
human resources and dragons.
They did. And I was like, this is so terrifying and so incredible. Like, one girl is an artist, and she's like, all right, cool. I got our logo. Here's our merch drop. I'm like sitting there, like, I have the biggest grin on my face going, I haven't touched the rule book in 4 hours. I'm like, this is, I
want
didn't
a
say a
brick
word.
chicken
I just let
shirt.
him do it.
I'd wear a brick chicken t-shirt.
Oh, it was like a
Yeah,
goth
so would I.
chicken with the combat
Where's that
boots.
merch?
Yeah,
Right.
where's the
They should
merch?
air
Drop
like
it in the link, Ryan. If you're here, if you can hear me, Ryan, put it in the Twitch link.
I don't have a link for brick chickens. I'm sorry. That's the one thing. I didn't get a brick chickens link.
It's 100% on Kyle. So if Kyle doesn't deliver, where do we find you on social media?
Desksanddorks.org will make brick
All right,
chickens
send
happen.
your emails.
I can make it happen. Or I guess, to use a more serious example, one of the things that my brother, who's runs an awesome podcast called Rootless, and they play the Root RPG, told me that they were walking around. I think it was him. I think it was someone he knew or someone he'd met. But they were walking around a convention and saw a bunch of people fighting a dragon, like in Dungeons and Dragons. And the players are so sucked into that moment and so incredibly invested in that encounter and in that fight. And the guy who's doing this happened to peek behind the DM screen, and the Dungeon Master wasn't tracking hit points at all. Didn't care. And asked the Dungeon Master afterwards, well, how did you know when the dragon dies? And he just goes, the dragon dies when it stops being fun to fight.
Absolutely.
And I was like, that's the most profound shit I've ever heard about. Like, that is my whole philosophy for role-playing games now. The minute I heard that story, I'm like, that's it. That's all that I want to know and hear. That's perfect. It stops when it stops being fun, we stop it.
And like, to an earlier point, since we're talking about, the idea of improvising as much as you can mechanically while still kind of keeping the game experience tight. We were just talking about the idea of roll dice, target number, pass, fail, and in the interests of not making Graham catch these hands, I'm going to say instead that I think the thing that people tend not to embrace and really should is the idea of alternate failure modes, right? I roll 14 and I need a 15. I don't fail to pick the lock. That's dumb. No, I jam it so that I have to use my bump key, which makes a whole hell of a lot of noise. And now there are 4 guards that weren't there before in the next room, right? Like, have a list of things that can go wrong, and when someone screws up, put one there.
Let me just thank you for unlocking a particular issue I discovered in a playtest of my next RPG on Saturday. You unlocked a problem for me. Thank you very much.
Hey, that's why we do these things, right? It's beautiful to just cross-pollinate this stuff, right? Game designers jamming is just the best thing.
Graham, I know you're a moderator, but I have a question for the other 2 guys here. Is that cool? And for you as well, because you're a designer too, and I want to
hear it, Kyle.
How do you guys find yourselves making failure fun in your games? Because that's something that's always one of the most exciting questions to ask myself when I'm making a game, and I'm just curious to see what you folks do.
There's 2 ways that I could answer this. One is as a moderator, as an MC, and the other one is like when I'm writing a game, because designing games is already weird for many, many reasons. You're essentially creating a cookbook that goes off into the world. That's one reason it's weird. The second reason it's weird is that role playing as a culture, oftentimes they'll buy books and never play them. So the idea that, like, as Pat on the previous hour pointed, the zero hour, the zero interaction with the book is the very first person who reads it. So wanting that to be an interesting or a compelling experience is like something I think about a lot. So the idea that like everything should be narrative is kind of what I come into, because that also speaks to like, why am I here? Why am I here in this space? Why do I find role-playing games provocative and interesting and endlessly fascinating? What is the alchemy of people being in the room and coming up with ideas and forgetting and being fully and emotionally invested in what they're doing? Is that I'm chasing this emotional connection to what people are doing. So the failure is about controlling time and focusing. So if I'm narrating, for me, there's no difference. I'm like, okay, well, what has happened before? What do I want to happen? And in that moment, then it's either accelerating danger or adding something, or maybe it's just sensory. And in terms of writing failure, I make sure that it doesn't stop at places, and that when you narrate something that falls apart, that has the same power, both creatively and within the story, that success does. That success implies going forward, but failure should go forward in the same way. The story begins and ends. If you think about it like word count or the number of minutes in a film, a success for the character is the same as the failure of a character. So it has to all be continually building regardless of what happens.
Yeah. And if you'll forgive me for being a little bit pithy about it and kind of summing it up, my first thought of it, you basically said it already, but essentially, rule -1, in my opinion, everyone knows rule 0, right? And I'm not the biggest fan of it, but set it aside for now. Rule -1 is the players, including the GM, everyone at the table having fun is priority 1. Everything else follows. So when somebody rolls somebody fails, I don't want to say, here's why you suck. That may be part of it, but the real question is, okay, here's a new problem. What now, right? Whether it's your guys falling over, or now you're James Bond in the overcomplicated death trap. Well, that's not a failure. That's an opportunity to kick some ass and get out, right? You want to raise the stakes, but you don't necessarily want to close off the avenue of progress. Just make it tougher and tougher, ratchet it up.
To piggyback on what you said, something that I started doing a long time ago that I realized in this binary description, just like you're narrating this moment, how do you bring life into it? Okay, you failed, or is it that the thing you're fighting is awesome? And so if you fail a attack roll, I almost never will be like, You swing too wide or you stub your toe. You're a dumbass. Everyone laughs. That's never how I do it. If you fail an attack roll in a simple sort of pass-fail game, I will then say it grabs you, it rips it out of your hand, it breathes in your face. I'll focus on how scary the thing is, and everyone is no longer thinking about the failed roll. They're like, oh man, this is getting more exciting, even though nothing mechanically has changed. It's the same thing with Kyle with the tumbler story of, oh, I don't track hit points. Like,
Right.
it's about the pacing of the story. Because everything we do is illusion. It's all artifice. It's all lies. Rules are lies.
Or even better, like not even better, but in addition, right? They could be awesome. Maybe you just got unlucky. You know, your sneaking attempt was perfect, but of course some bat had to fly over at that exact moment, right?
I tend to write a lot more mystery games. So for me, the issue of failure is, or the way I structure the games is that I have a one true timeline of like what is happening that is not PC involved. What did villain do? What is villain going to do? What is villain's goal? And it's sort of like this, like, you know, timeline that every time there's failure, I just like do something like, cool, what's the next thing moving forward? So that's sort of how I structure my games, is so that they more function as, and as you fail, that is what sort of like, okay, this is the next section now, and this is the next introduction. My next game is about players controlling flocks of birds, and so it's like you're trying to interact with the world as flocks of birds. I ran it on Saturday for some people, and they're trying to do something like, there's no way this logic train goes anywhere. Like, you're trying to make something happen, but it's just not quite clicking with a logistic way, a realistic way a character would react to the birds doing a thing. Like, cool. So like, after you did your 3 tries, cool, next plot beat happens. We're just moving on. Like, give room experimentation, let people play in the sandbox, test the walls, and if they do, you know, it's 3 no-goes, cool. The next thing needs to happen no matter what. We move forward. We're not just gonna sit here and just sort of like stare at our shoes wondering like what the answer to the problem is. It doesn't matter, because there's something else happening. It'll advance the storyline forward.
I was gonna say, I find the only, like, the role-playing games that I make now, and this is really true for Vessel, are they're not answers to problems that happen in game. They're answers to problems that I had either with a previous design, or problems that I think another game I played I wish would have addressed. I know we're kind of segueing a little bit here, but like Vessel for me, and I don't know how it is for you, for all of you, but
so let's
sorry.
frame this a little bit, because
Yeah, frame it.
While we have time, I would love for everyone to go around and explain their game in level 1, starting with Kyle.
Oh wow, that's what a crazy random happenstance, man. It's a total chance, I'm sure.
Go ahead, Kyle.
So I made a game called Vessel, which is a role-playing game aimed squarely at 2 players, and it answers the fundamental question of what would happen if McCready from The Thing was in love with the parasite inside of him.
I watched The Thing last night, Kyle.
Yeah, right. It's the classic chestnut, right? But no, so essentially what it is there is a human being who is the vessel, who is just a regular person trying to go about their regular everyday life. And then the entity, which is the overwhelmingly powerful force that does not have a physical body. And so they're borrowing the vessel. And essentially what it is are these 2 players. So it's a GM-less system where each player takes turns GMing for the other one. But the vessel and the entity both have a goal. They both want to accomplish something. It can be as mundane as the vessel who's like, I need to get through my performance review, and it is Tuesday, and I need you to stop, Anubis, making giant shadow golems that crush people's skulls, like for 15 minutes, please. That'd be great, thank you. Or the entity who wants to, depending on the type of entity that you choose, or the type of entity that you want to make up, maybe they want to regain their physical form, or maybe they want to come back into the world as something entirely different. Or we had one of our playtesters was like, you know what my entity really wants? Cheetos. Just a metric ton of Cheetos. I have lived in the black expanse of eternity, and never once have I tasted nacho goodness. Why? And basically what it is it's a relationship building game. And so whether or not you achieve the goal doesn't really matter. It's just how are you and the entity inside you really going to wind up living and moving forward after this, or after the events of that game.
a new rule. I added this rule in the previous hour. I'm going to do it now. Whenever one of us explains a game or pitches a game, we all then immediately have to be incredibly positive about whatever they just said.
I mean, you don't have to be incredibly positive, but I appreciate the support.
No, it's a new rule.
It's a new rule?
It's meta. We're playing a meta game within this. The meta game is that whenever somebody pitches a game, we have to be like, "Oh man, that was so awesome!"
Wow, that's so. All right, do we track positivity points? Do I level up? Can I do stuff with those?
Hey, we're kind of anti-math here. I think we've already established that.
Man, all right.
Unless it's doing something, why have it? I mean, that's kind of my philosophy.
Crap, I almost had enough points for a cup of coffee.
I know. I was going to trade him in for the Frisbee at the top shelf.
Kyle, I loved reading Vessel, specifically because of your the writing of Once. Long ago, I realized that when I'm role-playing or running a game for people who I've never met before, or a new system and everyone's really tentative and like, I don't know, I'm like, none of that matters. Like, tell me about your character. Okay, and then I listen and I kind of mull it around in my head. And then the only question I ever ask them is, okay, what do you want? And they say, what do you mean? And I'm like, you got to want something. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a glass of water, you want to get rich, even if it's just vengeance, even if you're ripping off a character from a movie, it doesn't matter. I need to want something, because then when we ask the eternal question, what do? You have some direction. It doesn't matter if you get it. You already called that out. And that's awesome. But having want as a mechanic, I think, is fabulous, because what I run into reading role-playing books all the time is that if I handed this to somebody who hadn't been doing this for years and years, who's been thinking about these things and internalizing, like, how is it going to teach them how to play?
Well, and that's kind of how I designed the game from the get-go, right? I think I'm one of those firm believers that you can distill storytelling to its base elements. And once you can do that, you can do whatever the heck you want with it, right? But that's really all every story is what does a character want? What relationships do they have? And how do those relationships play in with what they want? Is a relationship important enough that it supersedes the goal? Is the character expecting that? Is the character willing to discard a relationship on some fundamental level? And this was true for After the Rain as well, which plays a ton with memory and relationship, because those are the character stats in that game. Everything that I make seems to be about, what does a person want? And how do their relationships impact that? But I think that's ultimately what every story is about. Whether it's a movie, a video game, a game like the ones that we made, I think that's just good storytelling in general.
I also really like that's a 2-player game, because sometimes you just want a quick game that's like not necessarily like wrangling a bunch of people together.
Yeah. And I do have a lot of fondness for games that are, I guess, kind of setting agnostic while still having something a clear intent on what you're saying, right? It is just as you will feel it just as viscerally if you want Cheetos versus if you want your PhD, right? Like, those are both interesting stories if you put enough interesting turns in the way, right? And I think you ask people, hey, what setting sounds good? Someone's going to have an answer.
It's definitely an instinct, or arguably a weakness, of a lot of my writing and design, is that I believe that even subconsciously, the players that are at the table know the kind of story they want to tell. So I hate writing setting, because what I like, my preferred form of play is for players to establish canon as they go, because that also means you're creating emotional investment in what's happening. I don't want to tell you there has been a dragon war unless a character incidentally said, there was a dragon war, and then everybody's like, holy shit, I gotta find out about this dragon war, and then they make it up. The Cheetos thing wouldn't be as funny if I came up with it, but if the person was like, I want to do the Cheetos thing, then all of a sudden both of them care about it. So almost always in my games, I have a section about, like, keep a list of the things you come up with. This is the way that you're going to be world building. Because I sort of don't want to, and I think that people are going to have more fun, and it's going to be private, it's going to be personal when they have these worlds anyways that they have and that they care about so much they want to come back every week and play pretend in.
Incidentally, the Dragon War totally fought over Cheetos.
They were now sort of a proto Cheeto. I mean, that's a common misconception. If you'd read your proto Cheeto dragon lore books, I know you would know that.
I was one of those Dorito heathens for such a long time. I missed out on the sacred texts.
Derivatitos. Zane, you've already talked about your love of mystery games, so I would love to hear about the Marquee.
Yeah, so
found
I
in
was
in level 1.
in level 1, yes.
Of this year.
Yeah, so the Marquee came about because I wanted to do something that was a swashbuckling sort of story game. It started off as one thing and then just it turned into a game where people are just answering questions. So each character, there's 4 different character types, which is based on like what your motivation is for crashing a gala hosted by the Marquis, who is feared and terrifies everyone and is still, does that for love. So you're exploring a palace and you're just like interacting with people. It's the one with all the charts, so you can just blindly roll just to random number generate yourself encounters. But I thought it was an idea that also kind of setting agnostic, because I just wanted to be like, what do you want it to be? Do you want it to be like realistic? Do you want it to be like he's a Satanist? Do you want it to be like, no, they're all ghosts? You can go any way you want with it. And I said we really need to have everyone tell a story about this one thing, and let that be, as you answer questions, you start filling in, and basically you're pitching to each other ideas. And I think that's my favorite part of role-playing games, where it is when you do the more sandboxy thing and people just start riffing on each other and start going back and forth and going, but what about this? It'd be kind of cool if this happened. And then like, yes, this whole game is just based on, yes, that's what happens now. So
there's a lot of things I adore about the design in this. The top level being that sneak into a party is one of the great set pieces. Like, who doesn't like the we're in disguise and we're going into the fancy ball, because it's so counter to the traditional D&D kind of exploring dungeon crawl thing. It's social, it's just as tense, it's dangerous. There are tenfold more NPCs. But the other thing that I love from a narrative standpoint is that you've centered the villain, and that everyone, you've sort of cracked this thing wide open of the lack of a party system, which is always hard to get away from, because oftentimes you're playing with a group of people and you don't want anyone to be sitting and not talking for a long time. But here, everyone's kind of doing their own thing, but it's all centered. It's absolutely laser focused at building up this villain, which I love.
Awesome.
I love
Thank
the
you.
idea that every single thing that everyone is doing is building up this single character, and everyone hates him, and it's getting worse. And everyone, he's getting more fleshed out and more evil and more ridiculous, and like that makes my heart swell. Absolutely, just imagine.
Well, thank you.
Can I just say I appreciate, Zane, that it's a swashbuckling themed one, because like that's the one, I guess, theme, vibe, setting, aesthetic that like it's just missing. Like I just want a good Zorro game, and this feels like Zorro, and I mean that as a huge compliment. I'm like,
Awesome.
oh,
No,
this guy,
oh, yeah.
it was
That's a
awesome.
compliment.
Reading
Absolutely.
it, like, I'm gonna carve a Z into this Marquis chest and Mark Z or whatever. I'm like, I don't even care anymore.
It's
so cool.
underserved a market, like really.
Usually like social games, because it's all about just being flamboyant and being extra, and it's hard to have a game where in many traditional like in F20 games, it's all you are flamboyant when you roll a 20, not you're just flamboyant for trying a thing. And so I think that sort of like let me unlock my brain a little bit on, oh, I can do this if there's like no like dice involved. If I'm not relying on a dice roll, you're just going to do a thing, but there's some ground rules as to how that can fail and succeed.
I want to hear Jim talk about his game. I'm excited.
You ready,
Yes.
Jim?
I'm so
Are you
excited.
ready?
Come on.
'Cause
Jim,
I'm
like,
ready.
There was like such
Zane,
a
are
long
you
pause,
ready?
Jim. Come
Yes.
That
Hit
was the I'm ready to talk about your game pause.
Yeah,
I
that was-
identified it immediately.
I'm done. I'm shutting up.
There was a lot of tension there, a lot of buildup.
All right. So I'll now ask forgiveness for earlier asking Graham to catch these hands about binary pass fail systems, because my game Insubordinate, available in level 1, is an anti-fascist science action fantasy game inspired by the latter-day Final Fantasy VII and on games from the Final Fantasy series. So there's a couple of things that run into each other here. One is I have always wanted to write an action dungeon crawler and never succeeded. Right? I'll be working on a game. It'll be, oh, I know, let's do an Uncharted style treasure hunting game in a fantasy setting. And then I'll be like, that's a terrible idea, because then you're just murdering people over this thing you're trying to get back for the good guys. And I'm like, okay, I've just completely ruined that setting. Let me try that a different way. Okay, now I'm going to make my dungeon crawling game. Crap, I've done something else. So I start with, okay, right? Final Fantasy, when you really distill it, it's anti-capitalist, or it's anti-authoritarian at its heart and soul, right? You are people who do not want to be heroes, made to be heroes through no choice of their own, and they then have to show up and do the right thing. So I tie it into myths and legends by saying there is a dominion that is trying to capture, control, or use as a weapon some ancient power, right? Your volcanic titan, to use one. And so now you have to go stop them from doing that, because if they don't, they're going to use it against you. And to quote a good friend of mine, Kate Bullock, all role-playing is a metaphor, right? She said it about PBTA games, but that's true in general. So the dominant society is going to use a very powerful tool against you if you don't capture it for yourself. That doesn't have any bearing on the real world right now, as far as I'm aware, but in a hypothetical case, it might just. And so if I want to deliver that message, but I want to do it in a way that fits sort of my branding, so to speak, which is player empowerment and, heroes that can actually, achieve their goals. I go ahead and I say, okay, why can't you jump 10 feet in the air and then cast an ice bolt out of your hand? Fire it against the hover tank that has a giant drill on the front. Well, if you have the giant hover tank with the drill on the front being driven by a Nazi, then you're good to go. So it is one of the I think more traditional, if not the most traditional game in the book, but I wanted to make sure I was still telling a story that that felt good. Right? That it's a power fantasy, but you are doing the right thing for the right reasons.
I love that it's explicitly Antifa. Chris O'Neill of Ninth Level Games wrote his love letter to the War Amongst the Stars.
Oh yeah.
Which is the caveat that you have to be punching space Nazis.
Exactly.
That you're looking for a gameplay loop, which is stars. It's a pool of resources. You only get it back by punching Nazis in the face. Sometimes the punching is a metaphor, so you're like giving water to somebody in a voting line. That is punching a Nazi in the face. So
exactly,
I really appreciate, Jim, games that have what they're doing immediately. They're hard on their sleeve, as it were. D&D is praised for being kind of about nothing, and it's sort of evolved with this culture of like what it is over time because of the culture it influences and how it influences culture, but really it's just sort of like a goulash of elements, but it really isn't about anything. So I love that you say up front, this is my inspiration and this is why, and these are fascist elements and you're fighting against them, and at the end you're like, okay, and also there's a Titan, and also I'm going to use clocks. And
yeah, so like if you run out of time, right, the fascists have taken that powerful tool and they're going to use it against you. Versus you show up in time, now you're the ones with the key, with your with your hand on the wheel, right? You gotta make sure you take control, otherwise someone else will.
I really want a follow-up game to that because I think you raise an interesting question of like, all right, cool, we've stopped the really big bad guy from getting the hands on the apocalypse, but now we've got the apocalypse. Because that's a lot of responsibility. And immediately as a storyteller, I'm like, oh man. Yeah, like there's so many like books and games and movies about like, oh, we did it. We beat the big bad. We have the super weapon. It's in our hands now. Okay, great. The super weapon's in our hands now. What comes next? Because
And what are we going to call this game, Kyle, that we're designing? What do you?
is it Cheeto Dragons? Because
Cheeto
I'm
the
in.
Dragon War?
Yes.
After the Cheeto Dragon War.
After the Cheeto Dragon War. by
You
Graham
have gained
Gentz
the
and
Cheeto
Kyle Ott.
Dragons. What do you do with them? ? Gather your 3x5 cards and dice.
And some
Are you-
snack food.
And
That's
some
our
snacks.
resource is snack food. You can
Yeah.
either spend it in game or actually give the game master real snacks in order
So
to do certain
you-
things.
Always
You
feed your game
could
master.
thr-
Always feed your game master.
You could throw the ring into Mount Doom, or
Or mount it to one of the eagles like a
Oh.
laser.
The Eagles could have done the entire time. I get so mad about that. They just didn't want to.
Wait,
'cause
really?
they're
Is
assholes.
this the nerd conversation we're gonna have? All right, Zane, go for it, man.
You can't bring it up around me. I will lose.
Come on, go for it. All right.
I
No,
mean-
no. I want to
air,
praise Jim's
air,
game.
air it out.
No, but I want to praise Jim's game because as a guy who every one of my friends loves Final Fantasy games, and I have historically hated many.
Mhm.
So I've heard all about them. I am neck deep in the culture of Final Fantasy, but I've never gotten to play one because I can get 5 minutes. Like, I'm bored. This is. So I like that there's like some crunchy, simulation of that. That's pretty dope.
To
I
jump
appreciate
off
it.
of that, Zane, I have fallen out of love with Final Fantasy growing up. As a kid, it was some of my first video game role playing games I played. On the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo, and then when 7 came out, it absolutely blasted my little brain. And Jim is deconstructing the story in a way that also appealed to me as a kid, where I'm like, okay, it's not an empire, it's a corporation, and you're killing the planet, and you're fighting these guardians that are actually part of the planet. So that the cosmic stuff is sort of kind of again backdoor world building, and you've distilled that thematically really well, Jim. And I think that in the few pages you have in level 1, it does a really good job for maybe a Colonel Mustard like Zane.
Well, I got to admit, I'm really looking forward to seeing what people do with that.
It's all gonna be Cheeto based, unfortunately.
I mean, if it can be as Cheeto based as it wants, as long as people are having fun and they're
There you
punching
go.
Nazis, I'm sold.
Yeah, that's it.
I just want my grandfather in World War II would have appreciated this conversation quite a lot.
As would mine.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Mine 3.
Yes.
As we have our time running out, I would like to go around and use our last few minutes to have everybody say where we can find your work. If we want to find out more of the things that you spit into the void of social media, by all means. And the last thing I want to leave everybody with is I want to ask you if you could make, run, or play any game in any setting, what would it be? I've done this with old friends that have said man, I really want to play Roger Rabbit. I really need to have space whales. Shout out to my friends Sean and Pat. But starting with Kyle, where can we find your stuff?
Sure.
And what is your dream game?
Oh man. Can I add one more little piece of spice to it too? Because I think
Yeah.
there's a piece of advice to if anyone out there in the chat is wanting to make a game. This is something my editor, and I'm going to shout her out entirely. This is something my editor tells me consistently because we have another game coming out hopefully soon. And that's the one thing of be confident when you make your games. You're the one that's kind of making that story. So if you're super confident about giving your players the tools, as Graham so eloquently put, when you send that sentient cookbook out into the world, it's going to be that much better. So if 3 dudes who make really weird stuff and also Cheeto Dragons can be this confident in our work, you should be confident in your work too. It's something I'm still working on. I'm not great at it yet. I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Same here, and I would like to add.
Yeah.
Get someone else to look at your game, because if you sit in your head and let that sit there, you will doubt yourself into not putting it out there. Go ahead, even if it's real rough, get a couple people, watch them play it, it solves so many of your problems, like, and it makes you realize what you need to work on, where you need to focus, and then also seeing the energy of someone taking a thing that you was in your brain and get excited by it is amazing, and will get you so far.
But yes, so you can find, if any of the stuff that I have talked about interests you, you can find all of Desks and Dorks stuff at desksandorks.org. We're on Instagram and Twitter as well, and on YouTube. Again, it is Desks and Dorks. If you're interested, you can grab yourself a copy of After the Rain, which is our first full fledged RPG. That's on there, as well as Red Panda Redemption. And obviously look at 9th level games for when the level 1 anthology comes out. Be on the lookout for Kyle Ott and Graham Gentz's Cheeto Dragons, the role-playing game, coming out sometime soon. You gotta tell me, Graham, when we're gonna work on this thing, because I love it. Yes, Spear Dragons. And if I could do any role-playing game, any setting, I'll talk about Vessel, because I think it's something I'm super proud of, and I'm stoked to be part of level 1. One of the proposed, I guess, Vessel and entity combinations was just this like 40-year-old schlub of a dude who's kind of like on the outs with life, who is then possessed by a female fertility goddess, and the two of them kind of have to work through that. I still think that's going to be a riot to play, so that'll be where I leave it with.
Zane, where can we find your work?
I'm currently only on Twitter at Gravedigger Zane. I'll be launching a Kickstarter in August for the upcoming zine thing. It'll be a Murder of Crows. If you want to play a polymorph game that is you playing as a god to a bunch of crows, that is your game.
Yeah, I do.
I'm Jim Dagg. You can find my work at VAgent0. That's V as in Victor, agent0.itch.io. I'm on Twitter at VAgent0. My main work that I'm pushing right now is a game called the Yggdrasil Initiative, which is a postmodern super spy action game about getting being super spies for people who are vulnerable instead of for the nations who's the highest bidder. And so if I have any advice for anybody, it is that coming from a guy who had imposter syndrome about joining a panel about imposter syndrome, if I can call myself a game designer and I put something out there, so can you. Honestly, the second you make a game and you put it somewhere where someone can read it or play it, you are a game designer. Take that, own it, run with it. And if I can play a setting in any game anywhere, it's going to be Psychic Detectives.
Yes, God, ooh, love a Psychic Detective. Jim's comments are exactly what I want to end on. We are all designers, and we didn't start that way. Level 1 is an awesome way to get your work out there. They'll pay you. There's people out there who will encourage you. There are cons and a community that's there. If you're writing stuff, if you make a homebrew, you're a designer. If you're thinking about things, you're a designer. There's really no reason why you can't go out into the world with that, because I will be very excited to see what you come up with, because I want more games and I want different games. I'm Graham Gentz. This has been Life Action Roleplay. Go to 9thlevelgames.com, see more stuff, play more games. Thank you, everybody. This has been an incredible time. Thank you to our guests in both hours. Y'all have been lovely.